escenario el señor Carlos Urriola.
Mr. Carlos Urriola, Guillermo Misiano, Miss Federica Noli, Mr. Maximiliano Alcorta, and Andrés Kulka, who will be with us virtually.
Bienvenidos, tomen asiento. No, porque Andrés, sí, señor, una silla. Usted no va a estar sentado.
Si no, yo estoy en el centro ahí. Hay uno online.
Sí, hay un online. Todavía no hemos empezado. No te he invitado.
No, vale. Pues me bajo. Estaba mirando y estuviesen. Vamos a esperar dos.
Muy bien, ya tenemos contacto con Andrés Kulka. Lo saludamos muy especialmente. Andrés, ¿cómo estás?
Andrés Kulka, hello.
Bien, ya la señora Federica está próxima a acompañarnos para iniciar con ese segmento de diálogos entre navieras y terminales portuarias. Me permito entonces presentar a nuestros panelistas, el señor Carlos Urriola, presidente de Manzanillo.
Carlos Urriola is the president of Manzanillo International Terminal in Panama, MIT. Mr. Guillermo Misiano, he is the president of PTP Group. Federica Noli is the commercial manager of Compañía de Puertos Asociados, COMPAS. Andrés Culpa is the director for Latin America of Hapag-Lloyd AG. He's with us virtually. And Maximiliano Alcorta, who's the regional manager of operations for the west coast of South America of Mediterranean Shipping Company. And the coordinator will be Miguel Garin Alemani, who's the international development director of Fundación Valencia Port. He will be the moderator as well. Can everybody hear me? Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being here. It is a pleasure and accomplishment as well that we can all be here together, sharing and enjoying of this beautiful event. So it's time for the thanks. This year, I don't want to give thanks. I want to express my admiration to Aapa Latino, and especially to my friend Rafa Diaz Balar, who's around here somewhere or about to come in, to Zulma, for her courage. And why her courage? Let me tell you. Because all this that you see here, it cannot be done in 2 or 3 days. It's been done for the past months. And when put together, this was a question mark. What was going to happen in 5-6 months' times? I remember certain calls from Zulma saying, what do we do? What should we do? And they were all very brave, very courageous. I think Antonio is my boss here. I told him, we're going to Cartagena. And he looked at me and he said, are you crazy? Yes. It was crazy. So I think we need to express our admiration for that very courageous decision-making. I also want to expand this admiration to Zulma's team, her girls, what I call Zulma's angels, Arabella, Asira, Virginia, Maria Julia. And it's my admiration for their capacity, for their job capacity, for their patience with all of us, for what they do and for how they do it. So very humbly, this is all I'm going to ask of you at this panel. I wanted a round of applause for all of them because I think they've earned it. And well, having said this, let's move into talking about ports and the ships that call at these ports with this wonderful group of experts that we have here. The photo. Why are we starting with this photograph? We started with it because when we designed this panel, we wanted it to be a continuation of the panel we had in Miami. At that panel in Miami, we had some rules to participate or to have the floor. And it is that this is not a panel where people are going to speak individually, but where sectors are going to speak. We want to focus this as a debate or a kind discussion between the shipping lines sector and the port terminals sector. Therefore, the questions that are going to be asked will answer as a block for each question. There's a series of questions, and additionally, let me tell you, nobody is aware of the questions, even though I've been threatened so much and written. They've given me drinks, they've offered me bribes to try to have the questions. They do not have them because I wanted spontaneity. We are all sufficiently capable, trained, and smart to have that spontaneity. So we're going to be asking a series of questions. And the idea for these questions is for somebody from the shipping lines side to answer, including the online participant, and on the other hand, to have an answer from the port operators. So having said this, you know, the representatives of the shipping lines on the one hand, the representative of the port terminals on the other, and me as the coordinator, very humbly, of this discussion. Shall we begin? Are you all ready? You have your water, your mics. Okay, you want some coffee, sir? Okay, let's continue. We are going to focus these questions or divide these questions into 3 topics, which are the most, I believe, interesting topics or more timely topics, the ones we dedicate much more time to in the maritime and port sector. We are going to talk about energy transition. We are going to talk about digital transformation. And of course, we're going to talk about the current status of the sector. And we are going to do it in this order. So let's begin with energy transition. We are in a paradigm, in a situation where global warming, some people would like it more, others would like it less. But it's come here, somebody can't hear. You can't hear us? Okay, yes. Yes, I can hear you now. Do you want me to repeat everything? The last 10 seconds. We're going to talk about energy transition, about digital transformation, and about the present status of the sector. Under energy transition, I was saying that we're in the midst of a situation where we need to start worrying about our planet, It's a situation where there's increasingly more national and international fora. We recently had COP26 where everybody talks, everybody who has an opinion says so, etc. This is a situation of social alert, social alarm, because this is one of the major concerns of many. And we're also in a situation, important situation, because we represent an industry that contributes to the issue of contamination, and the approach that we're going to look at is how to solve that issue. So energy transition then. The first question then is, of all the alternatives being contemplated to reduce global warming from our sector, or to reach that point of zero emissions, of all these alternatives, which do you believe is the most effective? And I'm going to ask two questions simultaneously. And which one do you believe is the one that's most going to be implemented? On the side of any of the blocks? Who wants to go at it first? Yes, as a very good student. Thank you, Guillermo. Energy transition in what is a fuel, the bunker of the ships, as one of the major sources of the negative contribution to global warming by our industry. I think this will be the fastest to implement. In fact, we have IMO 2020, very briefly IMO 2023, and with a very short schedule in order to reach emission reduction simultaneously. And I believe that what's good, a good contribution from the latest Convention on Climate Change is all of the visibility that's been given to all of the activities, the community in general, not simply one or the other sector, where it was identified that the world is a single one, that we don't have a planet B. This is a single planet A with a plan A, and if we don't care for it, we'll disappear. And that is going to make, because for international organisms to support these types of transitions, because this means or implies very large investments. The change from to natural gas as a fuel, or to hydrogen, or to ammonia, which I believe is the one the most potential. And I'm sorry to interrupt. Of which of these do you believe is going to be the most effective and the one that's going to be implemented? For me, I believe that modernization towards ammonia, the first step to doing it, I think it's the simplest to implement, and above all, or especially in South America, when we have a large potential of being able to transform green hydrogen into ammonia. By the shipping lines, Maximiliano, let's give the floor to Andrés, who is farther from here, and we'll leave the next question for you. Hello, Andrés, how are you doing? Can you hear me? Yes, we hear you clearly. Well, first, I would like to thank Aapa for the invitation, and to tell you it's not that I was not courageous, that I wasn't there personally. It was an agenda issue or a schedule issue, and it was very good that we have found this new way of communicating with each other, which is a result of the pandemic, but I hope I can contribute or share with you my small contribution. Regarding the question, I don't know if we're going to have much discussion about this question. I agree that the issue of fuel is going to be one or if not the most relevant change in our industry. And I also believe that the present status of our industry is where the shipping lines have many resources to invest in new technologies, and this is being done. I want to confirm that the majority of the shipping lines has very aggressive goals regarding reducing contamination or reducing pollution targets, and we have invested heavily on ships with dual fuel, with LNG, large capacity, so we're moving very quickly in that direction. And Andrés, very specifically, of all the measures, those you're implementing, those you know are in the market, which do you believe would be most effective? Independently of what you believe, which one you believe is going to be implemented most? That's a very complex question. It is very, I wouldn't dare say which will be the one that's going to prevail. What I could tell you is that at least in our case, we are investing in natural gas technology, in dual fuel engines that allow for this type of energy. If that's the one that's going to prevail or not, it's very difficult to know, but at least we are betting for the time being on that technology. Yes, the question is difficult. Yes, that was the idea, to try to make it a bit difficult. Let's move on to another question. Oh, Maximiliano, you wanted to add something? I believe that with IMO 2023 that Guillermo mentioned, the shipping lines are going to be forced to reduce our footprint and our effects. Therefore, to fulfill with all the requirements, with the itinerary, beyond the investments we need to make in more ships, we need for the ports to deliver greater productivity, which is something that's been decreasing as a result of the pandemic. Congestion, lack of containers, etc. So this integration of both players is going to determine how successful or not will be the measure to which we're forced to. Like Andrés said, we're investing in fleet, we have the fuel issue, but we also need of the port player. Today, at least in the coast of the area I'm responsible for, only one terminal has approached us to offer the possibility of connecting to the port's power supply, which also helps reduce emissions. The challenge is not simply what we can do in terms of the restrictions or conditions of IMO rather, but the joint work with the rest of the chain. Well, I believe that's a good comment. Coordination between the operators and the shipping lines. Well, it was an answer from each side, but I cannot say no. Yes, I think that we also have a component. If the vessel complies with all the emissions conditions and the ports don't, and we're very far in Latin America from complying with that aspect, and I think there's a matter or an issue where there will be large investments. But in addition, who's going to pay for those investments? So I want to leave it there just as a compliment to the previous comments. Federica. But it's clear this is the only question where I'll let each of you answer. Otherwise, we will never end, and Suma will be mad and won't invite me next year. So, well, simply, I wanted to say that I see that terminals are adapting as well to this alternative technologies. At least at COMPAS, we've implemented an alternative power system using photovoltaic energy. It is a new project, and it's headed in that direction. Of course, I agree with Carlos in that the road is still a very long road and that we need support. I think the investments are indeed very large. Well, thank you very much, Federica. Let's move on to the second question. Still under energy transition. There's a reality. There's a large distance with a society that does not know an industry and that considers us a very contaminating or very polluting industry. So again, it's a dual question. Is this consideration or this concept of the people that doesn't know us, that is it justified that we're very polluting? And the next question for either block is, how do you think we can reduce this distance or this difference in opinion or this concept, this idea of us? Yeah, I agree, Miguel, with your vision. I think that mistakenly, and we have to do a mea culpa, I think that as an industry, we're failing in explaining what is a true impact and how we contribute to reducing said impact. But it is true, and I coincide in that the community sees us as an important actor in contaminating gases emissions. I think it's the contrary, because the mode of transportation, sea transport, day to day we hear about technologies, about progress, about e-commerce, but ultimately someone needs to carry the goods from point A to point B. And that's going to have to be done with an equipment, a tool, or a person, and that generates a carbon footprint. So we need to look at what is the most efficient way, and indeed, via sea, a ship carrying, say, the X grams of carbon issued is the most efficient or the least worst solution for the environment. But we also see opportunities. We occupy large spaces, visible spaces in our communities. And like the representative from COMPAS said, for instance, the alternative of moving or to photovoltaic power using these large surfaces, both the water as well as ground, allows us to show how we can collaborate with the communities with which we interact, the commitment we had in reducing our carbon footprint. So you think there's an issue, especially of communication? Perhaps in this sector, we don't know how to communicate with society to explain the benefits or to tell them that we are not as detrimental. Maximiliano? Well, I share his vision in that there's a mistaken opinion, because I believe that maritime transport is the one that least generates pollution. As a Chilean, I am going to focus on Chile. I've always criticized that the national hero at the port of Valparaiso looks at the mountain instead of looking at the sea. And what you're taught in school is that the mountain and then the sea for going to the beach. So when you want to talk about a maritime country, and I believe this, when talking about this continent, we are very far from that reality. For instance, the Port Valencia, the Netherlands, there's another vision of what being a maritime country is. Today we talk about protecting coastal trade in the countries, to give an option, to have an option for employment. However, we lose sight in that Latin America needs to work as a single entity, as a single neighborhood. But if we use the maritime ways or the shipping more, we would help the entire continent with coastal trade within South America and Central America to reduce contamination much more, to supply the lack of carriers. In Chile, there was recently in the news, we needed 20,000 drivers to operate our buses and trucks. So ignorance, because of our responsibility of not informing more, of not communicating, of what the shipping lines are doing, of what the port industry is doing, is the core, and as to how we need to reduce said distance, said gap. On this side, just for clarification purposes, there's no shopping without shipping. Let's don't forget that. If we compare the maritime industry with the air industry, the maritime industry is less contaminating, but very interesting of the several debates that occurred, and tying this in with the environmental impact and digitalization of the processes. What Helmut presented this morning regarding support for new technologies is that making more visible the shipping lines so that their transit is as effective if the savings of fuel is according to the requirements and according to what technology allows us to have, to make a smarter transit. That is also very important here with digitalization. Yes, that's a very good comment. Andrés, we don't want you to leave out without hearing your opinion if you want. Maybe just to underscore that we are within the transportation companies where those that contaminate, that pollute less by ton moved. The decrease in power use in recent years is very significant, and we need to communicate it well. We're talking of around 60% since 2009, 2010, or 40% if other indicators are used. So we have significantly reduced power consumption in recent times per ton carried. Well, perhaps this brings us back to what we were discussing earlier, Guillermo. It's a communication issue. We don't know how to communicate well the benefits of our sector. And well, the final question under energy transition, which is very simple. Beyond these big messages that everybody knows, everybody has an opinion. When you're a politician, you have a master's degree in environment because everybody speaks. And those decisions that say in this year, this is going to happen, in that year, this other thing is going to happen. Beyond all that, what do you believe, you who are private administrations, what do you believe that public administrations can provide to the sectors, to our sector, to the shipping line sector, to the port sector, to improve the issue of the environmental impact of the port and shipping industry? What can public administration provide? Well, of course, guaranteeing interconnection in the system of the provision of alternative energies to the ports, because alternative energies are being produced, but this alternative energy is not always connected to the entire system. And it's, of course, a transition that's ongoing, but of course to have that facility of being able to interconnect the alternative energies that are being produced, whether it's wind energy or energy via gas, and other systems to the port terminals. What about the shipping lines? What can public administrations do to help us in this challenge of energy transition and making our business to have a better reputation and produce less emissions? Andrés, Maximiliano, either of you or both? Andrés, can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. The truth is, the goals that have been established, which are finally, ultimately determined by public entities and force us all to move quickly, have been, and I believe we've advanced, or we are advancing, at least what I perceive in our company, at a much accelerated rate than we had before, and we have very clear goals as to what we need to do. So I at least feel that the progress that has been made in recent times is very important. Yes, everything passes through public administrations, the shippers, private ports. We can have good intentions. We'd want to apply our things, but there's many differences in the regulation of each of the countries where we're reaching. Many times the shipping line is held accountable. But this would be like for 150 or more situations. So it is important that for there to be coordination amongst all the ports. There is lack of coordination between the port master plan, the growth of it, and the regulating plans. So I think here starts a bit the improvement as to what is the entire chain. There's still a lot of bureaucracy to solve, starting with eliminating all paperwork. And after that, then we can take a leap and move into digitalization and etc. Yeah, there's no doubt that if there were common standards in Latin America for all the ports, it would be easier for all the port operators, and it would be infinitely easier for all the shipping lines to meet those standards and not have to adapt according to each port's circumstances. I think that's more or less what your answer was. Well, let's conclude this first section and let's move on to IT, digital transformation. And we will begin by recalling that digital transformation is something that is here to stay. There you can see what our desk used to look like. Today, this desk we all have in our hands, in our mobile phones. We also know how the COVID situation has affected or continues affecting in that acceleration that this sector has needed in terms of digital transformation. And we know what I said earlier, that digital transformation is no longer that transformation, it's a reality that is here to stay. So it could or might be doubtful in the world, but I think that none of us here has any doubt about this. So the first question under digital transformation is, and here I do want you to think very much about this. Of all the technologies discussed, we just heard a panel earlier that talks about all the technologies. We see them on TV, we see them at panels, we hear about blockchain, the Internet of Things, big data, the digital mirroring, etc. Which do you believe is the first one that's going to consolidate or is consolidating? Of these mentioned here or of others? And after that, and the next one, I think will be a bit complicated, but which or what do you think will be the future, or which one do you believe will be the most important in the future? So let's switch the order. Let's start with the shipping lines, okay? Carlos, go ahead. Andrés, Maximiliano, the ball's on your side of the court. Andrés, I think Maximiliano is saying you should be the one to answer. I think that right now, and in our case, the Internet of Things is what we have. We are also working a lot on platforms. So we have some blockchain and big data. In April this year, we launched everything that has to do with the development of processing VL digitally. I think it is something that will undoubtedly facilitate the operations. We have the case of a client in Brazil who is very happy for having done all the proceedings digitally without having to depend on an office being open or closed or being able to collect or not his container at the port. That is a measure that is starting to show that with the approval and the work of customs, we will be able to advance in digitalizing and advancing is in a document that historical in the maritime industry, which is the bill of lading. In Chile as well, starting this January, it will be respected that the bill of lading for import cargo will be digital. So these are small steps or small samples that show that if the continent works all together, we could also generate good practices that will have result positively for all. And what is cooking in that department of innovation for the future for us? Maybe, well, you can surely not share everything, but perhaps there's something you could share. Well, in trends, we have smart containers for dry cargo as well for refrigerated cargo. In fact, in Ecuador, it's called telematic. We started this year with an order of 3,000 reefers. So from Antwerp, we can monitor temperature, atmospheric conditions, and or any other change required by the client in order to maintain this reefer monitored, and thus relieving the ports a bit of this responsibility. And also, we have 2 additional cases having to do with security. One in Bolivia, which is very significant. We have 2 clients who are focused on mineral cargo who use the container to additionally confirm that their cargo is not affected by sunlight. Because being affected by sunlight, the car will reach its destination with issues. We could even generate an explosion, just for you to draw a conclusion. And I believe this is undoubtedly a great progress, but it is difficult to see that the customers or the exporters want to incorporate this technology because, on the other hand, there's others that are generating their own. Thank you very much. It's not easy, huh? For the ports, well, there's the questions for you. What do you believe will be the first thing that's going to consolidate? And the one that we're most interested in to be some sort of magicians. Which one will lead the port sector in the future within the entire digital transformation process?
Well, I will go for blockchain because there are 2 factors that we need to take into account. One is security. We speak of digitization, but everyone has to go through an antivirus course and how to protect the systems. And the other topic is, what are the governments going to do? What are customs going to do? Quarantines. Because here we are speaking with Mars, but we cannot speak to the guy who's in the gate. So I think that we need to strive to see how the governments are going to work together in order not to have a different technology in each country because somebody decided that it was the sexiest one at that moment. I fully agree with Carlos. Integration needs to be amongst the whole system, amongst the logistic chain. We have been seeing the added value here, not only as only shipping companies or ports or the government or ground transportation, but it's the integration among all of them. I agree with Carlos that at this moment, blockchain is one of the tools widely used. Cloud computing is something that we have assumed, but it is something new. Yes, it is within technologies, and that is necessary in order to save all this data and to have all that data available. And in that sense, I think that the most important thing is to have technologies that can have like an outreach in order to consider the whole chain. What shipping companies develop could be read at the port, and what's developed at the port could be used for logistics. Thank you, Federica. Okay, a quick contribution. I agree that the technology is blockchain. I don't know if it is the best one today, but it is the one that enables to have more legal security, and it is the one that control entities have clear for a quick implementation. I don't know if it's the best one, but I think it's the one that will facilitate digitization. And of the existing technologies, it is the only one that coexists with container traffic with loose cargo. Andrés, a last comment. I also think that the technology is blockchain. In our case, only in a 2-year period, 25% of transactions that we have with our customers are digital ones. It's like they can book their cargo themselves in a digital manner. I mean, that's amazing. Thank you very much. So we continue with the panel with digital transformation. Christmas is close, so we have to start with our wish list. Okay, shipping companies, if you would like to ask the ports for a desire regarding digital transformation, which could be the one you have the representatives of different ports, and I need to ask, it's just something free, it's free of charge. So what will shipping companies ask at the ports, always within the framework of digital transformation and taking into account the importance of digital transformation, which is an aspect of paramount importance. If you want, I can start in the short term what we do today, but we still have enhancement opportunities, are the different connections. I think that there are many terminals with which we are well connected, but we still have a long way to go in order to have the connection with all of them. And that facilitates the process and makes of it a more efficient one. I will ask for investment in TOS. There are some ports here that do not have an IT development for their cargo, and some have some systems that are obsolete. And as Andrés says, ITI communication is difficult. I mean, for example, a carrier who's bringing in a container can withdraw another container without leaving the port and being part in the queue. That TOS or TOS system is key for short-term development. The petition need to be responded to. Well, TOS, we sell TOS. But I think that the important thing is how can we really recover the investment that we make in digitization through transferring part of these investments, obviously with a proven efficiency. I think that from my standpoint, that is what I will ask Santa Claus for in this Christmas. My dear Carlos, this petition is of shipping companies. Wait until you have to ask for what you want. Here, the shipping companies are the ones that should ask Santa for their gift. So, ports, what are you asking shipping companies for? I've liked Maximiliano contribution because it has been very specific, and I think that specific answers are the ones that contribute the most. I mean, here in TOS. Okay, port operators, you have the shipping companies here. What will you ask in terms of digital transformation? 1 second. Since I have interrupted you, now you're the first one to answer. The idea is to make sure we can have a better way to transmit data. I mean, in time. I mean, digitization is useful if we get the data in time. For example, we have problems with cutoffs, with cargo versus ship, and then to look for a way in which this is more expedited. And at the same time, if we need to make some additional investment in digitization, the idea is for these investments to be recovered, because between that and the environmental ones, we are speaking of significant investments. I agree with what Carlos has said. I think that communication is going to allow for us to save time. I will not ask that to shipping companies, but to authorities. It's useful to a certain extent to have access to what's coming in digital form, but it is useless if I need to duplicate or duplicate the task, because authorities are still working in with or analog. So what we cannot recover with. I mean, what COVID helped is in the digitization process. So now customs and other entities are more flexible when it comes to that. But if we do not have the change, the change in all the chain, I mean, if shippers ask for better operational systems, so they are, or to be more in line, but if they do not recover through the freight, what the investment, and if customs doesn't use that instrument, then it's useless. What's your Christmas present? Port terminals, as Carlos said, for the digital part, for digitization, and to comply with the shippers' request, they have to make some additional investments. And I say additional because obviously we're going through a process which is taking place in all the terminals of the region. It's a modernization, adaptation, enlargement process, depends on the case of each terminal. And we are adjusting to the new request of shipping companies. New vessels, new companies. So I think that on the side of shippers, this implies huge investment on the side of terminals. Terminals are the first ones to be interested that in the internal cycles of containers do not have that reprocesses for many reasons, because of time, because of resources, and also the environment, because if a container comes and goes, spends twice the amount of energy. But these are processes. And we have been modernizing, expanding the infrastructure. And hand in hand with that, we're going through digitization processes and also working on energy conversion and also the interconnection with the entire system, which depends on the local authorities and what the government is doing, and the connectivity, because as we saw in the previous panel, we are in a process in which the region's connectivity is below other continents. It's lagging behind if you compare it to other areas of the country. This is a process, and as terminals, it is great to have advanced in that digitization, and we are going in that direction, and this requires many investments at the same time. And at the same time, we require the government support considering that type of investment. So in that sense, ports can have some contribution, some subsidies. That's the gift. Now we are going to speak of the sector's current situation. My first idea about this, and I'm sure that you all agree with me, is that before we were asking the media to be in the front page, and now we are like on the front page for free, and we will pay not to be on the front page. So that's a savings that we need to take into account. So that's the first advantage regarding this topic. Yes, the news, that's what it is. Thousands of graphs. I've included an additional graph on the amazing increase in freight. And with all the news related to the container, with all the scarcity there is, origin, destination, new firms that want to become shippers or operators. That also make the news because people like to read that type of news. So we've asked for the presence in advance, but we see that Christmas is very near, and that's included in the media, and they are using our sector because, the public opinion identifies this as a problem of the logistic chain, mainly of ports and shippers. So we are making the news, we're making the front pages. So, the storm is perhaps dramatic. I thought that Black Friday was going to be chaotic. Well, let's see what happens with Christmas. We are in Latin America. This is a Congress of Latin ports, Aapa Latino. So we want to see the current situation of the sector focusing on Latin America. So the question is, it's a very simple question. How is this situation affecting Latin America? Let's give it that name, the situation. How is this situation affecting Latin America? Let's give the floor first to the ports. I recently said something that sounded like a joke, that there is no shopping without shipping. The people that go to Walmart, that go to the supermarket, the people that buy online, they want for their cargo to arrive. So it's not fair that a sector that moves the cargo is to be blamed for what's happening. And well, the news are very dramatic indeed. So we have two terminals in Vietnam. Vietnam is now opening again. So this means that the cargo situation that has been crew there, it's going to continue coming. We have the Chinese New Year that's going to have an impact. The Asian services for the west coast of South America, some of them are coming with delays. So I think that the situation is going to remain the same during what's left of the year, with the exception of some moments that we have weather issues because of wave heights. Actually, the queues in Latin American ports in general terms, I mean, we haven't had the same problems, but what is really happening is that anything right now, we have 50 ships in Vancouver because of the rainfall. So whatever happens anywhere in the world affects all of us. Perhaps less, but in Latin America, we have been lucky, given that we are not facing those queues. We do have the problems of freights, transport, gates, but I think this is going to continue for at least the next 6 months. Yes, the situation is very tense. The logistic chain is affected by this. And because of that, anything that happens has a reason. Federica, what do you want to say? I want to make an additional comment along those lines. Because in Latin America specifically, most of the countries, and I would dare to say that all of them are more importers than exporters. So the balance of trade tends more towards the import side. We import quite a lot. So if you compare this to other areas of the world, for example, all that situation affects this in a stronger way because many activities depend on imported input. So if the Christmas presents do not arrive, nothing happens. But when the input that you need to move forward with the industry's activity that really affects the country's economy. And if you add to that the fact that many countries, which could be, Colombia, they have had a high impact on costs, because we know that prices have increased and things are coming with absurd prices. And for example, we see that with dollar, you see the exchange rate, and it's always a negative record. We are losing purchasing power. And we are increasingly facing higher prices. Inflation is going to strongly affect us. That is the strongest impact that we are having here. And also you have to add to this all the problems that we face in the chain. Okay, now to continue with the ports block, what can you say about this? We're focusing on Latin America. We're speaking about the situation of the sector. I agree with Carlos and Federica with respect to the containers business, with the container traffic. I want to add a specificity here that we have in the southern region of South America, Argentina, Uruguay. We are like the last link of the chain of the maritime line. So all this stress along the freight line really hits us. If you lose a call, you lose it, and that's regarding imports and exports. So I'm going to focus on general cargo. The situation is worse with the cost of ships per day. It's skyrocketed. So we had to change the design of ships from Handymax to Supramax and Panamax, and then you have to make port investment, not only in port but in warehouses, because the batch coming is different. And in Central America, I mean, for example, it's like the perfect storm, because in addition of the pressure of COVID, congestion in the ports, you have to add something that takes place every 50 years. It's that the waterways decrease their level. It takes 2 years, and based on the reports, we're leaving that aside. Larger ships, but with more draft. So the cargo that was going to Argentina, which had to have a call in Uruguay, and then they had to continue with the rest of the ports in the Paraná River. So I asked the minister, my Christmas present, to expedite this with customs, and I think that was the main problem that we faced, given we didn't have the regulation and the elements to face that problem. I think that in this sector, we are asking Santa, and also for birthdays, for Easter, and that is that they must support us. Andrés, focusing on Latin America, how do you think that this situation in the sector is affecting Latin America? I think we can spend the rest of the day talking about this topic. First and foremost, is supplementing what Carlos has said regarding the situation in Latin America versus the rest of the planet. I think that in other places the problem is worse, and I would like to have better news. We are specifically seeing today, or perhaps during the past 60 days, the best situation in Latin America since the pandemic started. So the effects of what's happening in other continents results in the fact that most of the ships are coming with delay, and we will need to skip ports more so than ever in order to maintain the itinerary of the ships. And the situation is still very critical, that on the side of supply. I also would like to clarify certain things, because there is a perception that freights have skyrocketed, and indeed they have increased quite a lot, but we have to recall that shippers, within the mixed charge that they have, a lot of the cargo moves by agreements, and obviously those freights are much lower in the contracts if you compare them to a spot freight in the market. Moreover, I think that this year we have an additional component, which is the increase in cost in the charter market, which most likely it is going to affect the shippers' itineraries, because the renewal of these agreements become more complex. The ships are deployed, and obviously this is affecting many services in Latin America. So sadly enough, in the short term, I'm not optimistic about the situation. We hope that we can sort this out as soon as possible. Thank you. Well, I wanted to make a comment. Another challenge that we have at the ports with this situation, with the lack of containers, is that many customers have looked for alternative solutions. Those that were usually bringing cargo in containers. Ahora they are they're bringing it at loose cargo, and that's quite a risk for the ports, because the system is organized to receive that cargo in containers. Yes, that's something that we encountered in COMPAS. So goods that were transported in containers, that obviously had an internal logistic at the port because they are prepared to receive the cargo in containers, and now you receive it in bulk cargo, whether it is paper, sometimes of rices, some machinery, some pre-painted steels that usually arrive in containers. So that's a challenge for the customer that used to bring the cargo in containers and now as loose cargo, and they do not have the experience to manage it as loose cargo. And obviously, it is a challenge for the port because they are receiving this differently, so they need to have the necessary equipment to download it in a way other than containers, and also the storage of those goods. Usually they go from the container to the plant to the customer, and now you have stored it in a place that is not planned for that. So that's quite a challenge that we are facing. Is that happening to you too? Okay. And Andrés, there is a news in Hapag that they charter a boat for $130,000 per day. Well, something that is indeed a concern, and it has an impact on the region, and that is when the ships leave Charlotte, and there is a change in the network of some lines in Latin America. So with this, we can encounter space problems to export because, and there I have to say that the charter market is just going mad. If you allow me to say something, Miguel. This could sound mean. Oh, I'm sorry. He dropped the microphone. Yesterday, Alberto Robinson showed 14 slides about the effect of climate change. As shippers, we have conveyed this message for the past 10 years, that's something that's coming. We have brought the largest ships that come to the continent, and it has taken 10 years to move forward with the authorities to have a maneuvering study and to have a fluid maneuvering. I do not agree with Alberto. I think that there are some human errors because the adequate measures are not put in place for an unfortunate incident. San Antonio, which is the main port of Chile, and I do not want just to focus on that, but if we saw what Ricardo Sanchez from ECLAC said in 2019, when we were speaking of more stable volumes, after Santos, the central area of Chile, between Valparaiso and San Antonio, they are the ports that export and import more containers. We're not talking about transshipment ports. I mean, so that for years, we have been trying to show the authorities that we need to be proactive in order to develop the interior trade of the countries. If the ports pilots are not trained and if they do not adopt the new technologies of the ship, for example, they were saying the boat with more maneuverability, I mean, it's okay, but I mean, the situation of Latin America, I mean, we still are not seeing the domino effect that this has. We're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. San Antonio is a key port for the network, and if that port is closed in Chile, there is no port that can receive 3,500 containers. So in that sense, if today we cannot align the continent, starting with customs and get rid of so many documents, so much bureaucracy. And if we cannot work in document transparency, then it's going to be very difficult to move away from this delay, which is not only because of COVID. I really want to congratulate the ports for the continuity that we have had, but I think that we have reached the limits. Everything is collapsed, the ports, yards, etc. So, Guillermo, you can answer this question now.
We have talked about how the situation is affecting Latin America. Let's look at it from the other side. What can be done from Latin America, from the Latin ports, to attempt to normalize the so-called situation? What do you believe can be done from the shipping line sector and from the port sector to return to that situation we had prior to this so tight logistics chain that is affected by any change, and that makes for goods to arrive late, and for many shipping lines and be complex? Guillermo, we'll start with you. What do you think can be done from here? I agree with what Federica said. I think it changes, and it's an opportunity for business. With the cost of containerized cargo, it is feasible that a lot of cargo, especially that were not large volumes, can pass through a break bulk warehouse. It implies a big challenge, like Federica said, because it's a client who's not used to everything that is represent to working with bulk cargo. It also implies that the port needs to make investments in equipment it didn't have, in training its human resources on something it didn't know how to operate. And also in our case, a specific case, we identified this business opportunity, and we have created an entire department within our commercial group to educate the client as to what are going to be his future needs. So I believe this is the only way to start putting in the market a warehousing offer or supply to remove or eliminate the stress there's going to be. This is going to be a specific case. It's going to last for only a while, and then we'll return to normalcy. On the other hand, I think we also need to get involved in to adjust the just in time with the closeness chains, where the ports are going to have to get more involved in the engagement with our clients and accompany them, not only for the goods to be within the warehouse and make sure it reaches its destination, and accompany them through all this. Well, more answers. The shipping lines. What do you think can be done? Briefly, Maximiliano and Andrés. Yes, two things. I think development of port logistics communities. When you reach a common good, I like Valencia and Barcelona's proposal. I would like to incorporate this in Chile. And secondly, I forgot. What are the things to improve from Latin development of railways? Yesterday during Mexico's presentation, it's something that's missing in this continent. Port operators, what can we do from Latin America, from home, to improve this situation globally? In this case, I would ask the clients' assistance. In the midst of all of this, clients need to help us in that scenario we're experiencing today, with all these changes and in the structure, the goods, the way we're receiving the goods. Clients many times are not used as the base of the warehousing for them, to avoid using a brokerage warehousing between the port and the plant. So the goods are dispatched from the ports as needed or as required at their plant, and sometimes these storage plants extend more than in other parts of the world. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, and the shippers here perhaps could correct me, in Latin America, the turning time of containers is slower when compared to Europe or other regions of the world. So here, the contribution that clients can give in this situation is huge, for the cargo to have a quicker turnover, and so as not to experience the congestions we're experiencing, the yards as well as the warehousing, to see a solution that is more agile and to expedite operations, to respond in a faster way. One final comment from Carlos and Andres. I think you will probably want to say something else as to what can be done from Latin America to contribute. I think that to go over or review processes, optimize it processes. And something that also concerns me is having optimization. We're seeing that perhaps somebody next to the near in the port steals the optic fiber, and we run out of the digitalization. We're done with digitalization, and there's nobody who knows how to unload a ship the old way. So we need to have a plan B in case this happens. Very quickly, on our side, we have all of our ships deployed, and we have continued investing in containers to try to revert this increase in the turnover of containers mentioned that it's 20%. In practice, it's a 15 to 20% less supply, and we have invested a lot in new containers. Carlos mentioned the latest chartering that was done by Hapag that we're also doing for Latin America. We're chartering ships at an extraordinarily high price to bring a bit more supply as a result of the issues mentioned with the issues between supply and demand. And lastly, in picking up on something Maximiliano said earlier, also I wish there were more availability of trucks. The issue of the lack of truck drivers in many locations in Mexico, in Chile, and other locations where truck transportation is one of the largest bottlenecks the industry has. And it is important to try to solve this issue as soon as possible, increasing shifts, improving conditions. But there's somehow an issue there that's very serious. Well, thank you very much. Were you going to add something else, or can we move on to the conclusions chapter? Later, there will be a question for all of you so that you can answer through the platform. But I think that it is good if each of you, independently of the topic or regardless of the topic, a conclusion to convey to our Aapa Latino audience. Let's give Andres the floor first, since you're so far away. Your conclusion? Regarding any of the three topics we've discussed. Well, I think that one always needs to look at a glass half full. And I think this crisis we're experiencing nowadays should hopefully encourage us and motivate us to generate several changes that our industry needs to better operate in the future. And here we're trying to accelerate certain things. For example, stability in cargo movements, increasing the number of existing contracts, extending the terms of these negotiations in order to try to avoid falling into supply and demand issues and prices skyrocketing, and focusing perhaps more on the quality of the service we're providing. For us, it is a priority, number one priority, to improve the service we're delivering today to our clients. Well, let's continue then in order. Federica, your conclusion quickly of this panel. For me, in conclusion, everything is related to everything. The three topics we've discussed. There's a very close relationship between environment, efficiency, the challenge of digitalization. We need to continue working hand in hand without losing sight of the three. This crisis, this situation, let's hope it's just a moment, and the way, as we have been discussing, the way how we are going to overcome this situation. But about the future of ports, I really liked the concept of communication, interconnection of the region's ports. At the beginning of this Congress, Casia talked about this. These are concepts that are very interesting that in Europe are already developed with all the programs they have regionally. Obviously, here we are in a different region. It's a process that's merely starting. But I wish, well, there's a road. Yes, I hope we can reach the levels, and hopefully this communication, the interconnections, the experiences are shared more frequently, more effectively in order to achieve a future system that's more interconnected. Because as to the human talent in Colombia, we have beautiful personnel, trained, professional. So we have the grounds to do things, and also in the region. Carlos? I think we always have to complain about something. But despite this, our industry continues very strong in the region. I believe that we need to address the challenge of digitalization and also zero emissions at the ports, that it's going to require a series of investments and a series of equipment replacements at the terminals. Like Maximiliano was saying, and it is true, how many ports can you connect offshore power in Latin America? Very few. So from the north, we'll cascade down the zero emissions, and also from Europe as well. We'll have this challenge. It will be a bigger challenge because as port operators in the region, we believe we can solve the emissions problem when we switch from a diesel to electric crane, but we connect it to the grid, which works with a bunker. So I think we need to start looking at this. And another very important thing with having to do with the presentation by Cartagena, you have to look at the full package. The velocity, the higher velocity will be dictated by the component that is the slowest of all those. And presently, unfortunately, it's something we don't control, which is the government. So we need to incorporate all this. Thank you very much. Your conclusions, Guillermo? To insist in that we don't have a planet B with which adapting to climate change, taking the necessary measures, that has to be a priority. Of course, digitalization cooperates in this because, like Federica said, we avoid double movement of containers, double consumption of energy. And it is not a bid, as was said, between the terminals and the shippers. I think it is joint work, and we need to add a new guest into this discussion, which are the international credit organizations. Today we heard the representative of CAF with wonderful plans for financing infrastructure works related to foreign trade to facilitate, to generate human talent development in remote areas or those that are behind in the American continent. We have the project or the pre-project. I think we need to work on this, because to say that it's going to be natural gas, ammonia, or hydrogen, the terminal has to be prepared in order to provide that energy to the ships that are calling at the port. And these investments will also imply with the Port Authority to renegotiate conditions as to how the concession was awarded. So it's fundamental in this discussion to this bottleneck we're seeing today in container traffic will be overcome. It will be solved somehow. The climate change won't, and if nothing happens, then we don't start working. Maximiliano, your conclusions before moving to the question from the public. For me, it's dialogue and teamwork. I think that it is a moment when the industry needs to have more conversations. Someone from headquarters made me realize that here in America, without Brazil, except Brazil, we all speak Spanish, but our systems operate as silos, not only customs, but also the relation amongst ports as well. There's a competition that's misunderstood as to how the industry should grow. And shippers don't own the truth. But we have put on the table issues like climate change, where we have taken charge with brought experts to the continent with technologies. and they're not used. It takes years for the governments to approve this because of fear, apprehension. We don't understand why. Because the port has tested it, the shipper has tested it. So what's the risk to be ran? So this work of incorporating good practices of what is done well in Colombia or Chile, Argentina, or Brazil should circulate, should flow. Well, thank you very much. Let's move now to a part which is a question from the participants. Anabela, you can access this platform with the QR code. And that question is, you've been appointed directors of a shipping line or of a port, and congratulations. You have been appointed directors, and at the same time, when starting on this new job, you've been allocated some resources or a subsidy. So the concern, these new port directors or shipping line directors, in what would you invest the money you receive? There are the possible answers. It can be works, outstanding works or investments. It can be technologies or IT. It can be environmental and emissions improvements. It can be training. Or if you're a pessimist, it can be a reserve fund should a pandemic return. So, directors, please go ahead. We want your opinion. We want to know what is the trend of this conference room of how to manage these resources when you're the director of a shipping line or of a port. I've been told this is live results. Here it is. Well, we have IT and innovation leading with 48%. Well, outstanding works and investments is neck to neck with environment. Training, 12%. I think you really need to look into this, directors. And it's not because we do training, which is very good training that we provide. It is important, but I don't want to influence in your answers and the results. I want to be impartial. We'll give you a couple more minutes. Anabela, is that okay with you? Well, it seems that this new managing team of the shipping line or the port is going to invest this very juicy amount of money in IT and innovation. Well, lastly, I've always said when I talk to Carlos that I consider him a master. And he's such a master that I had a quote from a Spanish captain that I heard once, and he's used it. And I would also like to conclude with that, because it's somewhat how it affects us and how it affects the entire non-port environment and our work and the things that happen to us. So with this no shipping, no shopping, which I think is very easy to remember, I would like to bid farewell to our speakers. Warm round of applause for them. All of you, thank you very much from the Port of Valencia and APA for trusting in us and allowing us to organize this discussion where we try to have the best experiences from the people who are truly important in the sector. Thank you very much and see you soon.